On the night of February 1st, 1959, somewhere on the eastern slope of a mountain in the northern Ural range of the Soviet Union, 9 experienced hikers made a decision that would end their lives. We know the date. We know the location. We know the weather was severe, with sub-zero temperatures and strong winds sweeping across an exposed ridgeline. We know the group had pitched their tent high on the slope of a mountain known to the local Mansi people as Kholat Syakhl, a name commonly translated as Dead Mountain. What happened next is not recorded in any diary, photograph, or radio transmission. At some point during the night, the hikers cut their way out of their own tent from the inside and fled into the darkness without boots, without proper clothing, and without essential survival equipment. They did not return. Weeks later, rescuers would find their bodies scattered across the frozen landscape. Some showed signs consistent with extreme cold exposure. Others bore injuries that investigators could not easily explain. The tent remained standing, partially buried in snow, its contents largely undisturbed. There were no signs of struggle inside the shelter. No clear evidence of an outside attack. No single cause of death that accounted for all 9. The official investigation would close within months, offering a conclusion that satisfied no one. More than 6 decades later, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of the most analyzed, debated, and unresolved mysteries of the 20th century. The question has never changed. What forced 9 capable hikers to abandon safety and walk in a lethal cold? To understand the Dyatlov Pass Incident, it is necessary to step away from the mountain itself and begin elsewhere. Inside the Soviet Union of the late 1950s, a society shaped by ideology, secrecy, ambition, and an intense faith in human endurance. In 1959, the Soviet Union was emerging from the shadow of Joseph Stalin's death. Nikita Khrushchev had begun a cautious process of de-Stalinization, loosening certain political controls while preserving the state's rigid command over information, institutions, and borders. Public life was still defined by conformity and discipline, but there was also a renewed emphasis on technical achievement, scientific progress, and physical resilience. Outdoor sport, particularly mountaineering, skiing, and long-distance trekking, was not merely recreation. It was cultural policy. The Soviet state actively promoted expedition hiking as a demonstration of collective strength and ideological virtue. To endure hardship, to navigate hostile terrain, and to return with precise reports and photographs was seen as a contribution to national pride. University students were encouraged to participate. Engineering institutes, in particular, treated such expeditions as exercises in planning, leadership, and applied problem-solving. Against this backdrop, the journey that would end at Dyatlov Pass was neither unusual nor reckless. It was ambitious, but it was legitimate. The route plan for the expedition fell into Category 3, the highest difficulty rating used by Soviet hiking authorities at the time. Completing it would grant participants official certification, credentials that mattered academically and professionally. Each member of the group was either already qualified or in the final stage of earning that status. The hikers were not thrill seekers. They were disciplined, methodical, and accustomed to extreme conditions. The expedition was organized through the Ural Polytechnical Institute in Sverdlovsk, an industrial city east of the Ural Mountains. The institute specialized in engineering, physics, and applied sciences. Many of its students balanced intense academic workloads with demanding outdoor programs. The leader of the expedition was Igor Alexeyevich Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student. Dyatlov was not charismatic in a theatrical sense. Contemporary accounts describe him as calm, deliberate, and technically minded. He had led multiple winter expeditions before and was respected for his attention to detail. He designed radios, built equipment, and maintained meticulous logs. Leadership, in his case, was procedural rather than authoritarian. The expedition initially consisted of 10 participants, a mix of students and recent graduates, ranging in age from early 20s to late 30s. Each brought specialized skills. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, was physically powerful and known for his endurance. Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, was energetic, sociable, and experienced in winter trekking. Rustam Slobodin, 23, was a recent engineering graduate and marathon runner. Ludmila Dubinina, 20, studied economics and was known for her resilience. She had previously continued an expedition after being shot accidentally by a hunting rifle. Yuri Krivonischenko, 24, had worked at the secretive Mayak nuclear facility and was known for humor and morale boosting. Alexander Kolevatov, 24, studied nuclear physics and had experience in classified environments. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, 23, was athletic, reserved, and well-trained. Semyon Zolotaryov, 37, was the oldest member, a decorated World War II veteran who had joined the group shortly before departure, seeking certification. The 10th participant, Yuri Yudin, would not complete the journey. Yudin suffered from chronic health issues, including joint pain and sciatica. On January 28, 1959, as the group reached the settlement of Vizhay, the last inhabited outpost before uninhabited wilderness, his condition worsened. After discussion with Dyatlov, Yudin made the decision to turn back. This choice would save his life. Yudin later described the moment as routine, even disappointing. There was no sense of danger. He watched his companions disappear into the snow, unaware that he would become the only living witness to their final departure. From Vizhay onward, the route entered sparsely populated territory. The northern Urals are not high by alpine standards, but they are exposed, wind-scoured, and unforgiving in winter. Temperatures in early February routinely dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. Storms could reduce visibility to meters. Once beyond the last logging roads, rescue was unlikely without external communication. The hikers traveled on skis, hauling heavy packs that included food for weeks, spare clothing, notebooks, cameras, and a collapsible tent designed to withstand snow accumulation. They kept detailed records. Photographs recovered later show methodical progress, river crossings, camp setups, moments of fatigue, and humor. Nothing in these materials suggests panic, conflict, or fear. The group moved at a disciplined pace, adjusting routes based on weather and terrain. Their intended final destination was Mount O'Torton, roughly 10 kilometers north of where they would ultimately stop. The name O'Torton translates roughly to "do not go there" in the Mansi language, though such translations are imprecise and often exaggerated in later retellings. The Mansi people, indigenous to the region, lived nomadic or semi-nomadic lives and avoided certain areas for practical, not mystical, reasons, whether exposure, poor hunting, or difficult travel. At the time, there was no known conflict between the hikers and the Mansi community. On January 31st, the group reached a forested area near the Ospia River. They established a cache, known in Russian hiking as a labaz, where they left excess food and equipment to lighten their load for the final ascent. This decision followed standard protocol. The next day, February 1st, they began moving toward the pass between Koletsyakal and an unnamed neighboring peak. Weather conditions deteriorated. Visibility decreased. Winds intensified. The terrain transitioned from forested shelter to open slope. According to later reconstructions, the group likely drifted off course slightly, ending up higher and more exposed than planned. By late afternoon, they stopped and pitched their tent directly on the mountainside. This choice has been debated extensively, but within the norms of Soviet winter trekking, it was not irrational. Descending into the forest would have required losing altitude in daylight, then regaining elevation the next day. Camping on a slope allowed them to maintain progress toward O'Torton. They cut into the snowpack, leveled the platform, and anchored the tent. Inside, they cooked, ate, adjusted clothing, and settled in for the night. The last confirmed photograph was taken that day. There are no records beyond that point. No radio transmissions. No journal entries. No eyewitnesses. When the group failed to return by their expected date, February 12th, initial concern was minimal. Delays were common. Only after relatives pressed authorities did a formal search begin on February 20th. By then, Whatever had happened on a mountain was already locked beneath weeks of snow, wind, and silence. The context is crucial. This was not an illegal expedition, not a reckless adventure, not a group unprepared for winter. It was a state-sanctioned journey, led by a competent organizer, undertaken by trained participants, in a society that valued endurance and documentation. Which makes what followed, not just the deaths themselves, but the confusion surrounding them, more difficult to dismiss as simple misfortune. The environment was harsh, but familiar to them. The procedures were known. The equipment was adequate. And yet, something occurred that night that caused 9 people to abandon all of it. What that something was cannot be understood without reconstructing the events that followed, step by step, beginning with the search and ending with the first frozen bodies discovered in the snow. The final phase of the Dyatlov expedition begins not with mystery, but with routine. Every confirmed action taken by the group in their last days is documented through photographs, recovered diaries, official maps, and later testimony. The challenge is not a lack of data, but the abrupt point at which the data ends. What follows is a reconstruction built strictly from verified records, meteorological data, and physical evidence found at the site. The group departed Sverdlovsk on January 23, 1959, traveling by train to the city of Ivdel. Spirits are high. Photographs from the journey show relaxed expressions, shared meals, and casual humor. The expedition was proceeding as dozens before it had. From Ivdel, they continued by truck and then by smaller transport to Vizhay, the last permanent settlement on their route. Vizhay was a logging town, accustomed to seeing hikers pass through. There are no reports of conflict, warnings, or unusual activity. On January 27th, the group officially registered their route with local authorities, a standard requirement. Their estimated return date was listed as February 12th. The following day, January 28th, Yuri Yudin withdrew due to worsening health. He turned back with some shared equipment, reducing the group to 9. This was the last confirmed separation. That same day, the remaining hikers entered uninhabited wilderness. From this point forward, everything the group did was self-managed. January 29th to 30th, steady progress. Over the next 2 days, the hikers followed the Lazva River, skiing northward through dense forest. Their pace was consistent. Camps were established before nightfall. Meals were prepared inside the tent using a portable stove. Diaries describe fatigue, cold, and navigation challenges, but nothing abnormal. Photographs from these days show organized camp routines, careful handling of gear, and no visible injuries. Weather conditions were cold, but manageable. On January 30th, wind speeds increased slightly, and temperatures dropped further. Still, the group continued. There are no indications of distress. January 31st, the equipment cache. On the morning of January 31st, the group reached a turning point. They left the relative shelter of the forest and approached the foothills of Kholat Syakhl. Recognizing that the final ascent toward Mount Otorten would be more demanding, they established a labaz, a supply cache, near the Ospia River. This cache contained excess food, spare clothing, and equipment intended for the return journey. The decision is important. It indicates confidence. They expected to come back. Photographs taken that day show the group smiling, joking, and carefully securing supplies. There is no suggestion of fear or urgency. Later that afternoon, they resumed travel, ascending gradually toward the pass. As elevation increased, tree cover thinned. Wind exposure intensified. Snow conditions worsened. They continued upward. February 1st, the final day. February 1st, 1959, is the last day for which a partial timeline can be established. Based on film rolls recovered from cameras found at the site, the group woke early and packed camp in cold, windy conditions. Visibility was reduced by blowing snow. Their exact intended route is debated, but the objective remained the same: reach the pass, cross it, and descend toward Otorten. At some point during the day, they drifted west of their planned bearing. This deviation was not extreme, but it placed them higher on the exposed slope of Kholat Syakhl than anticipated. In such conditions, minor navigational errors were common. Rather than descend back into the forest, losing time and altitude, they made a critical decision. They would camp on the slope. This choice has been scrutinized extensively, but within the logic of winter trekking, it was defensible. Descending would have meant navigating unfamiliar terrain in worsening weather, then reascending the next day. Staying put preserved progress and avoided unnecessary movement. They selected a site approximately 300 meters below the ridgeline, on an incline estimated between 15 and 30 degrees. Using shovels and skis, they cut into the snowpack to create a level platform. The tent was erected, anchored, and reinforced. The slope was open. There was no tree cover. Inside the tent, they removed skis, boots, and outer layers, standard practice to reduce moisture buildup. Clothing, food, cameras, notebooks, and boots were arranged along the perimeter. This is not speculation. When the tent was later discovered, boots were lined neatly. Food was untouched. Personal items were organized. Nothing suggests chaos at this stage. The group cooked dinner. They talked. They settled in for the night. That is the last moment that could be described with certainty. The night, a sudden departure. At some unknown point after nightfall, likely between 9 p.m. and midnight, something changed. What we know comes entirely from physical evidence. The tent was found partially collapsed, still standing, with snow accumulation consistent with weeks of exposure. Most crucially, the fabric showed multiple slashes cut from the inside. These cuts were deliberate. The fabric was torn open along lines that allowed rapid exit. The entrance flap was not used. This detail matters. If the hikers had time and composure, they would have exited normally. Cutting the tent damaged their primary shelter, a decision that makes sense only under perceived immediate threat. Footprints led away from the tent. They were visible despite snow cover because of a crust formed shortly after the incident. Investigators documented 9 distinct sets of footprints, descending the slope in a loosely grouped formation. The prints showed people wearing socks, bare feet, or partial footwear. They did not show signs of running. They moved downhill toward the forest, approximately 1.5 kilometers away. No footprints were found returning to the tent. The cedar tree. The first bodies were discovered on February 26th, near the edge of the forest. Under a large cedar tree, searchers found Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko. They were barefoot. They wore minimal clothing, mostly underwear and torn garments. A small fire had been built beneath the tree. Branches up to 5 meters high were broken, as if someone had climbed or attempted to climb the tree. Both men showed signs consistent with death by hypothermia. Krivonischenko had bite marks on his knuckles, possibly self-inflicted. These details suggest prolonged exposure and extreme stress, but not immediate trauma. Between the cedar tree and the tent, searchers later found the bodies of Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. They were spaced at intervals, aligned roughly along the path back to the tent. Their positioning suggested movement uphill towards shelter. Slobodin had a minor skull fracture, but it was not considered fatal. All 3 showed signs of hypothermia. Their clothing was incomplete. Some wore garments later identified as belonging to others. This redistribution of clothing is consistent with known survival behavior in extreme cold. The ravine. The remaining 4 hikers, Ludmila Dubinina, Nikolai Thibault-Brignol, Alexander Kolevatov, and Semyon Zolotaryov, were not found until May, when snowmelt exposed a ravine deeper in the forest. They were buried beneath several meters of snow. Unlike the others, these 4 were more heavily dressed. Some wore clothing taken from those already deceased. Their injuries were severe. Thibault-Brignol had massive skull fractures. Dubinina had extensive chest trauma and was missing her tongue. Zolotaryov had crushed ribs. Kolevatov had less obvious external injuries but showed internal damage. There were no external wounds consistent with a physical assault. No knife wounds. No bullet wounds. The injuries resembled high-impact force, comparable, according to forensic reports, to a car crash. Yet there were no corresponding external signs. What the timeline shows and does not. The reconstruction reveals several confirmed points. The group exited the tent voluntarily, but urgently. They moved together, not in panic. They attempted to reach the forest. They attempted to build a fire. Some attempted to return to the tent. Others sought shelter elsewhere. At no point does the evidence show a single catastrophic event killing all 9 at once. Instead, it shows a sequence of decisions made under extreme conditions, followed by exposure, injury, and death. What triggered the first decision, the abandonment of the tent, remains unknown. There are no diary entries explaining it, no radio logs, no surviving witnesses, only the mountain, the snow, and the physical traces left behind. In the next section, the focus shifts from what the hikers did to what happened after they failed to return. The search, the investigation, and the official conclusions that followed. When the Dyatlov group failed to return on schedule, no immediate alarm was raised. In Soviet expedition culture, delays were expected. Weather could stall progress for days. Route difficulties were common. A missed return date did not automatically imply danger. But by February 16, 1959, concern among families and university officials had intensified. Parents pressed the administration of the Ural Polytechnical Institute to act. Only then did formal search efforts begin. What followed was not a single coordinated operation, but a layered response shaped by limited information, harsh terrain, and the procedural constraints of the Soviet system. Initial search efforts. The first search parties were composed primarily of volunteer hikers and fellow students, many of whom were personally acquainted with the missing group. They knew the planned route, the expected campsites, and the terrain. On February 20th, teams were dispatched by foot and ski, supported by local Mansi guides, whose familiarity with the region was considered essential. Soon after, military aircraft, including helicopters and fixed-wing planes, were brought in to survey the area from above. This escalation indicates that authorities had already recognized the seriousness of the situation. Despite aerial reconnaissance, progress was slow. Snow cover was deep. Visibility was often poor. Temperatures remained well below freezing. The terrain was vast, with no clear trail markers beyond the last known points recorded in the hikers' diaries. Search teams followed the planned route northward from the Ospia River. On February 26th, nearly 3 weeks after the hikers' disappearance, the first major breakthrough occurred: discovery of the tent. A search party spotted the partially buried tent on the slope of Koletsyakal. From a distance, it appeared damaged but intact. Up close, its condition raised immediate concern. The tent was still anchored. It had not been carried away by wind or crushed by a massive avalanche. Snow accumulation suggested it had remained in place since early February. When investigators examined the fabric, they found multiple cuts, several of them long and clean, made with a knife. These slashes were oriented from the inside outward. This was documented photographically and later confirmed by forensic analysis. Inside the tent, equipment remained in place. Boots were neatly lined along one side. Coats, backpacks, cameras, food supplies, and notebooks were undisturbed. A flashlight was found resting on top of the tent, suggesting it had been placed there deliberately. There were no signs of a struggle inside. No blood. No indications that someone had entered the tent from outside. Footprints led away from the shelter, descending toward the forest. Investigators followed them. The first bodies, approximately 1.5 kilometers from the tent, beneath a cedar tree at the forest edge, searchers found the bodies of Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko. They were dressed lightly. They were barefoot. A small fire pit lay between them, its remains partially buried in snow. Branches on the cedar tree were broken high above the ground, suggesting someone had climbed or attempted to climb the tree, possibly to scout the area or to gather dry wood. Both men showed signs consistent with death from hypothermia. There were minor abrasions on hands and faces, but nothing suggesting a violent attack. From an investigative standpoint, the the scene raised immediate questions. Why were they undressed? Why were they separated from the tent? Why had they not returned? Expanding the search. Between the cedar tree and the tent, searchers soon found the bodies of Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. Their positions suggested they had attempted to move back uphill. Slobodin had a fracture to the skull, but medical examiners initially described it as non-lethal. All three were determined to have died from hypothermia. At this stage, 5 of the 9 hikers had been accounted for. The remaining 4 were missing. Search efforts intensified. By early March, military involvement increased. Soldiers conducted grid searches. Additional aircraft were deployed. The ravines and forested areas below the cedar tree were probed. Still, no further bodies were found. Forensic examination. Autopsies on the first 5 bodies were conducted in March 1959. The medical reports documented signs of extreme cold exposure, frostbite, minor external injuries consistent with falls or environmental contact, no fatal wounds, no signs of sexual assault, no evidence of alcohol or poison. The official cause of death for all 5 was listed as hypothermia. This conclusion was straightforward and, on its own, uncontroversial. However, investigators were already aware that hypothermia did not explain why the hikers had abandoned their shelter in the first place. Discovery of the remaining 4. It was not until May 4th, after significant snowmelt, that the final 4 bodies were discovered. They were located in a ravine approximately 75 meters deeper into the forest from the cedar tree. They were buried beneath 3 to 4 meters of snow. Unlike the first group, these hikers were better dressed. Some wore multiple layers. Several garments were later identified as belonging to other members of the expedition. The injuries were immediately apparent and troubling. Autopsies revealed severe chest trauma in Dubinina and Zolotaryov, massive skull fractures in Thibault-Brignol, internal injuries without corresponding external wounds. Dubinina was missing her tongue and parts of her soft tissue. The medical examiner noted that the force required to cause these injuries would have been significant. Crucially, he also stated that the injuries were not caused by another human being. There were no defensive wounds, no knife marks, no blunt force trauma patterns consistent with assault. The injuries resembled those seen in high-energy impacts. How such forces were applied in a remote ravine without external damage to the skin was not explained. Radiation findings. During forensic analysis, radiation was detected on some articles of clothing belonging to 2 of the victims. The levels were elevated above background, but not uniformly present across all garments. This finding was noted in the investigation file, but not explored in depth. At the time, radiation was a politically sensitive topic in the Soviet Union. Several members of the group had connections to classified facilities, but no official link was established. The report did not clarify how or when the contamination occurred. Official conclusion. On May 28, 1959, the investigation was formally closed. The final report concluded that the hikers died as a result of a compelling natural force, which they were unable to overcome. This phrase was vague. It named no specific mechanism. No avalanche was explicitly cited. No environmental phenomenon was described in detail. No responsibility was assigned. The area around the incident was temporarily restricted, and the case files were archived. Families received little explanation. The public received none. Within the Soviet system, this closure was sufficient. But outside official channels, questions remained. The investigation had documented the evidence, but had not explained it. Why the tent was cut open. Why the hikers fled. Why some suffered catastrophic injuries. Why radiation was present. And why the final conclusion avoided specificity. These gaps would become the foundation for decades of speculation. In the next section, the focus shifts away from the investigation's actions and toward the physical evidence itself. What exactly was found, what it clearly shows, and what it stubbornly refuses to explain. By the time the investigation closed in May 1959, officials had collected a substantial body of physical evidence. Photographs, autopsy reports, witness statements, maps, weather data, and recovered personal effects were all cataloged. On paper, the case appeared thorough, and yet, when examined closely, the evidence does not converge toward a single, coherent explanation. Instead, it forms a pattern of anomalies, facts that are individually explainable, but collectively resistant to resolution. This section examines those elements one by one, not to interpret them, but to understand exactly what they establish and what they do not. The most consequential piece of evidence is the tent itself. When searchers discovered it on February 26th, the tent was still standing. It had not been swept away. It had not collapsed entirely. Its support poles remained in place, and snow accumulation suggested it had been undisturbed for weeks. The tent's position is significant. It was located on an open slope, roughly 300 meters below the ridgeline of Koletsyakal. The incline was moderate. There was no visible debris field above it, no gouged snow path, no obvious signs of a recent avalanche. Inside the tent, items were orderly. Boots were arranged neatly along the side. Coats and outerwear were folded or placed in expected positions. Food supplies were intact. Bowls and utensils suggested that a meal had been prepared but not fully consumed. There was no evidence of a struggle. No bloodstains. No overturned equipment. No torn sleeping bags. The tent, however, had been cut open. Multiple slashes were present along the side panels. Forensic examination confirmed these cuts were made from the inside using a knife found among the group's possessions. This detail eliminates several possibilities. It rules out an intruder entering the tent and attacking from outside. It also suggests urgency. Damaging the tent compromised the hiker's only shelter in an environment where exposure could be fatal within minutes. The tent's entrance flap was functional. It was not blocked. There was no structural damage preventing normal exit. Cutting through the fabric was not necessary unless the occupants believed they could not use the door or believed they did not have time to do so. This is the first major anomaly. The second concerns the footprints. From the tent, investigators followed a trail of footprints descending toward the forest. These prints were preserved due to a combination of snow conditions and wind crusting shortly after the incident. They were described as clear and discernible, though gradually fading with distance. The prints showed 9 individuals moving downhill together. Some were barefoot, others wore socks. A few had partial footwear. There were no signs of running, no staggered spacing indicating panic. The stride length suggested controlled movement. This is critical. If the hikers had fled in terror, whether from an animal, an attacker, or a sudden collapse, investigators would have expected chaotic movement. Instead, the footprints suggest deliberate travel. Whatever compelled them to leave the tent, it did not immediately incapacitate them or cause disorganized flight. At the same time, the lack of proper footwear indicates that they did not expect to remain outside for long. The evidence supports a scenario in which the hikers believed they could return. They did not take boots. They did not retrieve coats. They did not gather supplies. They left as they were. This contradiction, orderly movement paired with incomplete preparation, is central to the case. The distribution of bodies forms the next anomaly. The first 2 bodies, Doroshenko and Krivonischenko, were found beneath a cedar tree at the forest edge. This location offered some protection from wind and was the first point of relative shelter downhill from the tent. A small fire had been built there. This suggests intention. Fire-making requires coordination, time, and functional motor control. These men were alive long enough to gather wood, break branches, and ignite a flame. Branches high on the tree were broken, indicating someone climbed or attempted to climb it. This could have been for visibility, looking back toward the tent, or for dry branches. Both men were lightly dressed and barefoot. Autopsy findings showed frostbite and hypothermia. Krivonischenko had bite marks on his knuckles and a small piece of his own skin in his mouth, an act sometimes associated with extreme stress or pain, but not unique or diagnostic. There were no fatal injuries. Between the cedar tree and the tent lay the bodies of Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin. Their positioning suggests movement uphill. They were spaced several hundred meters apart, consistent with individuals attempting to return to the tent independently as strength failed. Slobodin's skull fracture has often been cited as suspicious, but medical examiners concluded it was not fatal and could have resulted from a fall. Again, hypothermia was listed as the cause of death. This progression, tent to forest, fire, attempted return, forms a logical survival sequence. Then the pattern breaks. The remaining 4 bodies were found months later in a ravine, deeper into the forest and significantly lower in elevation. They were buried beneath meters of compacted snow. Unlike the others, these 4 were relatively well-dressed. They wore multiple layers. Some wore hats and gloves. Several garments belonged to other hikers, indicating clothing redistribution after death and established survival behavior in cold environments. However, their injuries were fundamentally different. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had a massive skull fracture. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov had severe chest trauma, including multiple broken ribs. Dubinina was missing her tongue, lips, and portions of facial tissue. Crucially, these injuries lacked corresponding external wounds. The skin was largely intact. There were no lacerations, no bruises consistent with beating, no defensive injuries. The medical examiner described the force required as comparable to a high-speed collision. Yet there was no vehicle, no cliff edge directly above the bodies, no obvious source of such impact. This disparity between hypothermia-only deaths and trauma-heavy deaths has never been fully reconciled. The soft tissue damage found in Dubinina has been particularly controversial. Her missing tongue and facial tissue were noted during autopsy. However, the body had been submerged in a stream beneath the snow. Modern forensic understanding suggests that soft tissue loss can occur post-mortem due to decomposition, scavenging, or water exposure. The autopsy report did not conclusively state whether the tissue loss occurred before or after death. What is certain is that there were no signs of hemorrhage consistent with violent removal. This detail matters, but it does not resolve the broader question of her fatal injuries. Another anomaly lies in the radiation findings. Several items of clothing, particularly those worn by Dubinina and Zolotaryov, showed elevated levels of radiation. Not all clothing was affected. The levels were not consistent across the group. At least one affected individual, Krivonischenko, had previously worked at the Mayak nuclear facility, where contamination incidents were known to occur. The investigation did not determine when the radiation exposure happened. It could have predated the expedition. It could have occurred during. It could have resulted from environmental contamination unrelated to the deaths. What makes this anomaly persist is not the presence of radiation alone, but the lack of explanation provided. The report acknowledged it and moved on. Environmental evidence adds another layer of ambiguity. Weather records indicate strong winds and extreme cold on February 1st, but no confirmed avalanche activity in the immediate area. Snow conditions on the slope were examined. The incline was moderate. The tent location did not align with typical avalanche runouts. Later expeditions and modern simulations have argued both for and against avalanche plausibility, but at the time, investigators did not document avalanche debris. Nor did they document seismic activity, nor did they document animal tracks near the site. There were no signs of a struggle with another group. No footprints other than those of the hikers and searchers. No weapons, no defensive wounds. The evidence excludes many explanations, but confirms none. Finally, there is the anomaly of the official language. The closing statement of the investigation did not identify a cause of death beyond hypothermia and injury. It attributed the event to a compelling natural force. This phrasing is unusual. It avoids specificity. It offers no mechanism. It provides no guidance for prevention. From an evidentiary standpoint, it is not a conclusion. It is an admission of uncertainty. And that uncertainty is grounded not in rumor, but in the physical record itself. The tent was cut. The hikers left. They moved deliberately. They split. Some died of cold. Others died of trauma. Radiation was present. No attacker was identified. No natural event was definitively documented. The evidence tells a story, but not a complete one. In the next section, attention turns to interpretation. Not speculation, but structured examination. Theories that have been proposed. Who proposed them? What evidence supports them? And where each one fails. By the time the Dyatlov Pass investigation was officially closed in May 1959, the physical evidence had been documented but not resolved. The lack of a precise explanation left a vacuum, one that would gradually be filled by competing theories, each attempting to account for the same fixed set of facts. What follows is not an attempt to decide which theory is correct, but to examine them as investigators should, by tracing who proposed them, what evidence they rely on, what they explain convincingly, and where they fail. No single theory fully accounts for every anomaly. That, more than anything else, is why the Dyatlov Pass incident persists. The Avalanche theory is the explanation most closely aligned with the original Soviet conclusion, even though it was never explicitly named in the final report. The basic premise is straightforward. A slab avalanche, or localized snow collapse, occurred above the tent, threatening to bury the hikers. Believing they were in immediate danger, they cut their way out of the tent and evacuated downslope toward the forest. This theory was favored because it framed the incident as a natural disaster, required no human involvement, and fit within acceptable Soviet narratives. There is supporting evidence. The tent was pitched on a slope. Snow conditions were unstable. Strong winds could have contributed to slab formation. The hikers' decision to leave quickly aligns with a perceived avalanche threat. Some of the severe injuries found later could, in theory, result from being struck or crushed by compacted snow. Modern simulations conducted decades later have suggested that a delayed slab release is physically possible under the right conditions. However, the avalanche theory encounters significant contradictions. First, the tent was not buried. It remained visible above the snow, partially collapsed but structurally intact. There was no documented debris field consistent with an avalanche path. Searchers did not report compacted snow masses or broken terrain above the site. Second, the footprints leading away from the tent were clear and undisturbed. An avalanche capable of producing the injuries seen in the ravine victims would almost certainly have obliterated those tracks. Third, the slope angle of the campsite was relatively shallow compared to typical avalanche zones. While avalanches can occur on moderate inclines, the specific conditions at Kolit-Syakhl remain debated. Finally, the timeline is problematic. If an avalanche struck, it did not immediately kill or incapacitate the group. They were able to move together, build a fire, and redistribute clothing. The delayed discovery of traumatic injuries complicates the scenario. As a result, while an avalanche could explain the urgency of departure, it does not fully explain the pattern of injuries, the intact tent, or the prolonged survival behavior observed afterward. The infrasound hypothesis emerged much later, proposed by researchers examining the interaction between wind and mountainous terrain. Infrasound refers to low-frequency sound waves below the threshold of human hearing. Under certain conditions, wind flowing over a mountain can generate oscillations known as Kármán vortex streets, potentially producing infrasound capable of causing physiological effects. The theory suggests that such sound waves could induce anxiety, disorientation, nausea, or panic without leaving physical evidence. Applied to Dyatlov Pass, the idea is that infrasound generated by wind over Kolit-Syakhl caused sudden psychological distress among the hikers, leading them to flee the tent irrationally. This theory is attractive because it offers a non-visible, non-violent trigger that could affect an entire group simultaneously. It also aligns with the orderly footprints, panic without physical chaos, and the absence of external threats. However, the evidentiary support is limited. There is no direct measurement of infrasound at the site during the relevant period. The meteorological conditions required for sustained infrasound generation are specific and remain speculative in this case. More importantly, infrasound does not explain the severe physical injuries found in the ravine victims. It may account for the initial evacuation, but not for crushed ribs, fractured skulls, or internal trauma. As with the avalanche theory, it explains one phase of the incident, but not the entirety. Another concept often discussed is paradoxical undressing, a documented phenomenon associated with severe hypothermia. As core body temperature drops, victims may experience a false sensation of warmth, leading them to remove clothing despite freezing conditions. This behavior has been observed in numerous hypothermia cases and is medically recognized. In the Dyatlov Pass case, several hikers were found partially undressed or barefoot, even though warmer clothing was available. This phenomenon likely played a role in the later stages of the incident, particularly among those who died near the cedar tree. However, paradoxical undressing does not explain why the hikers left the tent initially, nor does it account for the redistribution of clothing among the ravine victims, which suggests deliberate survival strategy rather than confusion. It is best understood as a contributing factor, not a cause. The military experimentation theory has persisted largely because of contextual suspicion rather than direct evidence. The Northern Urals were not far from military installations. Several members of the group had connections to classified facilities. Reports from the time mentioned strange lights in the sky seen by locals and pilots in February 1959. Some have suggested that the hikers were exposed to secret weapons testing, missile debris, or explosive shockwaves. This theory attempts to explain several anomalies simultaneously: the radiation, the traumatic injuries, the vague official conclusion, and the subsequent restriction of the area. However, no physical evidence of weapons testing was found at the site. No shrapnel, no blast residue, no crater, no burns consistent with explosions. The radiation detected on clothing was limited and inconsistent. It did not align with known fallout patterns. Declassified records have not revealed any testing activity in the immediate area on that date. While the Soviet government's culture of secrecy fuels suspicion, suspicion alone does not constitute evidence. The military theory remains unproven. The Monsi attack theory was briefly considered during the initial investigation and later dismissed. The Monsi are an indigenous people of the region, and early rumors suggested the hikers may have encroached on sacred land. This theory was examined directly. Investigators interviewed Monsi hunters. They participated in search efforts. No evidence of conflict was found. There were no signs of struggle, no weapon injuries, no unfamiliar footprints. The Monsi had no motive and no historical pattern of hostility toward hikers. This theory was rejected early and is not supported by the evidence. Finally, there are paranormal and supernatural explanations. These range from unidentified creatures to extraterrestrial encounters. They persist largely because the incident defies simple explanation. However, they rely entirely on the absence of answers rather than the presence of evidence. No physical data supports them. From an investigative standpoint, they're not theories, but placeholders for uncertainty. They do not engage with the documented facts in a testable way. When each theory is examined independently, a pattern emerges. Every explanation accounts for some elements of the evidence, but none account for all. Avalanche explains urgency, but not injuries. Infrasound explains behavior, but not trauma. Hypothermia explains death, but not departure. Military activity explains secrecy, but not physical traces. No theory resolves the case completely. This does not mean the truth is unknowable. It means the available evidence is incomplete. In the next section, the focus shifts to what has happened since. Modern re-examinations, renewed investigations, and why the Dyatlov Pass incident continues to resist closure even in the age of advanced forensics. For more than 3 decades after 1959, the Dyatlov Pass incident existed largely in silence. The case files were archived. Public discussion was minimal. Families received no further clarification. Within the Soviet system, unresolved questions were not unusual, but they were rarely revisited. That changed in the late 1980s. The collapse of the Soviet Union fundamentally altered access to information. Archives that had once been sealed were gradually opened. Journalists, historians, and independent researchers gained access to original investigative documents, photographs, autopsy reports, and correspondence. For the first time, the Dyatlov Pass Incident could be examined outside the constraints of state narrative. This shift did not produce immediate answers, but it did expose inconsistencies, omissions, and unanswered questions that had been largely invisible before. Release of case files. In 1990, portions of the original investigative materials were made public. These included official search reports, autopsy summaries, photographs of the tent and bodies, witness testimonies from rescuers, the final conclusion document. The release confirmed several long-debated facts. The tent was cut from the inside, radiation was detected on clothing, and the cause of death was listed as a compelling natural force. It also revealed what was missing. There was no detailed reconstruction of the final hours, no comprehensive analysis of injury mechanisms, no meteorological modeling, no follow-up inquiry into the radiation findings. The files showed an investigation that documented evidence, but stopped short of explaining it. This realization reframed the case. The mystery was no longer just what happened on the mountain, but why the investigation ended where it did. Independent Russian investigations. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Russian researchers, many with technical or scientific backgrounds, began conducting independent analyses. Some retraced the route, others examined terrain, slope angles, and snow conditions. Several recreated the tent setup using period-accurate equipment. These efforts produced valuable contextual insights. Researchers confirmed that the tent location was exposed but not irrational by Soviet hiking standards. They demonstrated that the slope could support a compacted snow slab under certain conditions. They also noted that wind patterns in the area could be severe and unpredictable. However, these reconstructions also reinforced key uncertainties. No single environmental factor reliably reproduced the sequence of events documented in 1959. Forensic reinterpretations. Advances in forensic science allowed modern pathologists to re-examine the autopsy findings. Several conclusions emerged. First, the traumatic injuries found in the ravine victims were consistent with high-energy blunt force trauma, but not with interpersonal violence. The absence of external wounds supported the original examiner's conclusion that the injuries were not inflicted by another person. Second, the soft tissue damage, particularly Ludmila Dubinina's missing tongue, was reassessed. Modern forensic opinion suggests post-mortem decomposition and scavenging are plausible explanations, especially given prolonged submersion in moving water beneath snow. This reframing reduced, but did not eliminate, the strangeness of the injuries. Third, paradoxical undressing and terminal burrowing, where hypothermia victims seek enclosed spaces, were identified as likely contributors to late-stage behavior. These insights clarified how some deaths occurred. They did not clarify why the hikers left the tent. Radiation revisited. The radiation findings received renewed attention in the modern era. Experts noted that the levels detected were elevated but not acutely dangerous. The contamination was localized to specific garments, not bodies. One plausible explanation is pre-existing contamination from occupational exposure. Yuri Krivonischenko's work at the Mayak facility, a site later associated with major nuclear accidents, supports this possibility. Another possibility is environmental contamination unrelated to the incident itself. What remains unresolved is timing. The original investigation did not determine when the radiation was acquired. Without baseline measurements, modern analysis cannot conclusively place the exposure before, during, or after the expedition. The anomaly persists, but its significance remains uncertain. The 2019 to 2020 official reinvestigation. In 2019, Russian authorities announced a renewed official review of the Dyatlov Pass incident. This decision was driven in part by public pressure and sustained media interest. The scope of the review was limited. Only 3 explanations were formally considered: avalanche, snow slab collapse, hurricane force winds. Other theories, including military activity and criminal involvement, were explicitly excluded. In 2020, the prosecutor's office concluded that a delayed snow slab avalanche was the most likely cause. According to this explanation, a compacted snow layer formed above the tent due to wind and terrain conditions. Hours after the hikers pitched camp, the slab shifted, exerting pressure on the tent and convincing the group that a larger avalanche was imminent. They evacuated quickly. The snow slab itself did not bury the tent fully, but it created enough perceived danger to force retreat. This explanation was supported by computer simulations and terrain analysis. However, the review did not reopen forensic examinations or address radiation findings in depth. Critics noted that the conclusion resembled the original, specific in mechanism, but still unable to account fully for the injury patterns and prolonged survival sequence. The case was closed again. The role of public analysis. Outside official channels, the Dyatlov Pass Incident has become one of the most studied unexplained events in modern history. Online archives, translated documents, satellite imagery, and crowdsourced analysis have expanded the body of accessible information. This democratization of research has produced both insight and noise. Some reconstructions are rigorous. Others rely on selective interpretation. The volume of material has grown, but the foundational evidence remains unchanged. No new artifacts from a site, no new witnesses, no new contemporaneous records. The case persists not because of secrecy alone, but because the physical record itself is finite. Why the mystery endures. Modern developments have clarified many secondary questions. They have narrowed the range of plausible explanations. They have ruled out several sensational claims, but they have not resolved the central mystery. What occurred inside the tent? What compelled immediate evacuation? What sequence of events produced both hypothermia deaths and catastrophic trauma? And whether those events were the result of one cause or several overlapping ones. The Dyatlov Pass Incident remains unresolved not because it lacks theories, but because it resists simplification. In the final section, we return to the beginning, to the question posed on that frozen slope in February 1959, and to what, after decades of analysis, we can say with confidence, and what must remain unknown. On the night of February 1st, 1959, 9 people stepped out of a tent on a mountainside in the northern Urals and did not survive the night. That much is certain. Everything else exists in layers of evidence, interpretation, and unanswered space. After decades of investigation, reinvestigation, and analysis, the Dyatlov Pass Incident resists the kind of closure we often expect from tragedy. It does not conform to a single cause. It does not point cleanly to one mistake, one villain, or one moment of irreversible error. What it offers instead is a record, fragmented, cold, and incomplete. We know the hikers were experienced. We know they were prepared. We know their shelter was intact before they left it. We know they exited deliberately but urgently. We know they moved together, downhill, toward cover. We know they attempted to survive. The physical evidence supports these conclusions without ambiguity. What we do not know is why the first decision was made. Every subsequent action, the fire, the return attempts, the redistribution of clothing, the final shelter in the ravine, flows from that initial moment. And that moment remains undocumented. No diary explains it. No photograph captures it. No witness survived it. The mountain did not preserve that answer. The evidence allows for multiple overlapping explanations. A sudden environmental threat may have made the tent feel unsafe. Extreme weather may have distorted perception and judgment. Injuries may have occurred later, during movement through hazardous terrain. Hypothermia may have driven final behavior. Each of these elements is plausible. None are definitive. This uncertainty is not a failure of investigation. It is a reflection of reality. Not every event leaves behind a complete narrative. Not every tragedy resolves into a single cause. The original Soviet investigation documented what it could and stopped where it could not proceed. Later inquiries refined the picture but did not redraw it entirely. Modern technology has clarified mechanics, probabilities, and context, but it has not added new facts from that night. The Dyatlov Pass incident endures because it occupies a narrow space between explanation and ambiguity. It is not inexplicable, but is incomplete. The 9 hikers were not symbols, not mysteries in themselves. They were individuals, students, veterans, engineers, who planned a journey, trusted their skills, and encountered something they could not overcome. Their final hours were shaped by decisions made under pressure, in darkness, in cold, on unfamiliar ground. That alone does not make the case extraordinary. What makes it extraordinary is that even now, with maps, models, and modern analysis, the decisive trigger remains invisible. And perhaps it always will. The mountain has not changed. The evidence has not changed. Only our perspective has. Decades later, the Dyatlov Pass incident still asks the same quiet question it asked in 1959. What compelled 9 capable people to abandon safety and walk in a lethal cold? There is no final answer, only the record and the silence that follows it.